Hello everyone, it's Becky here and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I would like to talk to you about a few books I read over the course from January, February and March. I also slowly started to fill in my reading journal, which is something I'm quite excited about because I think it comes together quite nicely, so once the whole journal is done I will be very happy to make a flip through video for you as well. So the first book I read this year is the book called The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. There you go. This book is a fantasy book and it's a standalone book. I am not a huge fan of fantasy myself, but I must say I quite enjoyed this one. It's not a very thick book, so it's quite easy to read it, and sometimes I would maybe say it's a little bit too easy because most of the things in this book I feel like you don't need to wait for them to reveal themselves, but they are kind of given to you on plate. So that is maybe one thing that if you really like fantasy genre when there is a lot of world buildings and very much of complicated characters and plots, maybe this is not exactly for you. But anyway, to the plot of the book. So the book tells a story about Alessandra, who is quite overlooked second daughter of noblemen. However, she has very high ambitions, and one of her ambitions is to seduce the Shadow King so she can marry him, so she can kill him and then rule to all kingdoms by herself. But as the story progresses, she will obviously fall in love with him, and as it comes out, she is not the only one who wants to kill him. And from there the story goes on, as you can imagine. I must say I quite enjoyed Alessandra's character because I think that she's very strong feminine character who knows what she wants and how to reach her goals. However, maybe sometimes she was a little bit too manipulative for my taste, but that's just who she is. On the other hand, the character of Kallias, the Shadow King, I must say I was a little bit disappointed because I would really expect him to be this, you know, powerful man who has special powers when it comes to his shadows. However, the way he was described in books just sometimes felt to me like he's this little boy who likes to play with his dog and that's all he cares about, so maybe this is something I didn't enjoy that much. One thing that bothered me teeny tiny bit about this book is the fact that, you know, Alessandra, she was a very fashionable character, which is something I really appreciate as a girl to read about, you know, the way she was designing her clothes, choosing fabrics and patterns. However, I must say that in this book I would really enjoy it more if I would know maybe something more about the other kingdoms, because I think there were 6 kingdoms in total. Yeah, 6 kingdoms or more of a world building in this book rather than, you know, reading detailed description of what kind of color she used and patterns and all these things. But besides that, I really enjoyed this book, so yeah, that's the first book of the year. So moving on to another book I read this year is the book called Educated by Tara Westover. In this book, Tara is describing her whole life, how she was growing up with her family in the farm in Idaho, her whole journey until she managed to graduate at Cambridge and also get a PhD at Harvard. In this story, Tara is remembering how she was growing up with her father, who was very devoted Mormon and never allowed his kids to go to public school or visit doctors because he believed that these public institutions are here just to brainwash you. Her mother worked as unlicensed midwife and Tara was the youngest from 7 siblings. This book also describes how she was dealing with relationship in her family because one of her brothers, who as it comes out was mentally ill, was very abusive towards her, like very abusive, like some of those scenes were really so uncomfortable to read, so be aware of that please. I would really recommend you to read this book because I think it's quite inspirational and important story to read. It also gives a great example of how extremism is never good, even when it comes to religion or anything else in life, because sometimes things that can start as first with good intentions, for example, you know, her father believed that not giving his kids education from public schools is the best thing he can do for them. Well, it wasn't, as it came out. Okay, so the third book I read this year is the book called All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, or Svetlo, ktoré nevidíme in Slovak. Yeah, there you go. So I read this book in Slovak because my sister gave it to my granny for Christmas and, you know, I immediately had to borrow it and read it myself. I must say that I was really excited about reading this book because I read absolutely great reviews about it. However, when I got to reading it, I realized it's really not my cup of tea, even though I really like historical novels or stories that talk about World War II, but this one just didn't fit for me. In this book we follow 2 parallel stories. One is set in France and one is set in Germany. In France there is a girl called Marie-Laure who is blind since very young age and she lives with her father, who works as a locksmith in National Museum. When the occupation in France begins, they need to leave their house and search for sanctuary at their uncle's place. Meanwhile, in Germany, we meet boy Werner, who lives with his sister Jutta in orphanage. He is very talented when it comes to repairing old devices, especially radios, and as the war progresses, he will eventually join Hitlerjugend. There is also the third storyline we follow in this book, and that is the legend of Lost Diamond, who, according to its legend, should bring unhappiness to everyone who owns it. So as you can see, really interesting characters and story, and I must say that until the first half of the book I was really enjoying it. However, as I got to the middle of the book, I must say that the pace started to go a little slower for me, and I just really found myself to literally skipping through some chapters and reading just the keywords on the page to know what is going on. But I didn't enjoy reading it that much, and I really needed to force myself sometimes to pick the book and start to reading. And one thing that kinda killed it for me completely is that, you know, it's not spoiling anything when I say that it's expected from the very beginning that these two characters, Werner and Mari, will meet eventually at the end in the book. However, when it finally came to the, you know, big expected scene, I must say I was quite disappointed with how it turned out, because it just didn't give me satisfaction I was so hoping for. So yeah. And one thing I need to point out as well is that I think that the fact that I didn't enjoy the book is also something to do with the translation. I never mind reading books in Slovak or even watch films, because, you know, that's how I grow up. Like, we dubbed and translate everything from other languages to Slovak, so it was never a problem for me. However, with this one, I find a couple typos from the very beginning in the book, which I think shouldn't really be there, and also some of the words just didn't fit there for me. Like, I felt that the words that translator decides to choose just didn't fit with the time. Like, they were too modern for the time the book was set in, if it makes sense. So it was just something really distracting, and I think that maybe sometime in future I will give it another go, but in English, and it might be better experience for me. Okay, so another book I read this year is the book called Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This one. It's really thin and so lovely book that you can read it within a couple days, and I would really recommend you to read it if you have, you know, a little bit time on Sunday afternoon and you can have a cup of tea and be cozy in bed and just read this book, because it's really lovely read. So the book tells the story of an old Japanese coffee house based in Tokyo called Funikuni Funikula. This place is very special because customers get a chance to travel in time. However, there are certain rules that must be obeyed. For example, you need to sit in a very particular seat, which is meanwhile occupied by ghosts, and you can also stay in the past only until your coffee gets cold. So as I said, it's a very lovely book to read and has a very nice shiny cover. I don't know if you can see it, but it really is cute. The one thing about this book, but it's nothing negative or anything minusy, it's just the fact how it is, and that's that the most parts in this book are driven rather with dialogues more than longer descriptions of the scenes. But I guess that's just because the author wrote previously a couple stage plays, and, you know, in scripts or stage play everything is driven with dialogue, so that's just something to know, but it's nothing that would be disturbing in any sort of way or anything. Something I really like about this book is the message of the book, because at least for me personally, I feel like the message of this book is, you know, try to live in a way that wouldn't force you to go back in time and change something. So that is something to think about in Sunday afternoon with a cup of tea. So moving on to another book I read this year is the book called Midnight Library by Matt Haig. In this book, Nora finds herself quite unhappy with her life and the decisions she made, and that leads her eventually to trying to commit a suicide. However, before she does so, she finds herself in Midnight Library with her old librarian from school, and there she has a chance to experience different lives she could have led if she made different decisions and different choices. It's a very beautiful read with many things to think about and beautifully written parts. We meet interesting characters and story is very engaging since the beginning. In one life, Nora is married with kids, in another one she's Olympic swimmer or then doing polar expedition. I was dragged into the story from the very beginning, which is great because, as you know, some books have a tendency to have very long descriptions at the beginning and it kind of takes time to get to the point. However, in this book I dived into the story from the very beginning and I just couldn't put the book down, so it's something really great about this book. And also towards the end it got teeny tiny bit predictable, but it didn't end up exactly as I expected. But honestly, I think that even if would, I really wouldn't mind because I was just enjoying the experience from reading it so much. So please go and read this book. Another book I read this year is the book called The Keeper of Lost Things by Ruth Hogan. This book is so delightful and charming and I just cannot recommend it to you enough because it evokes all sorts of stories. I was happy, I was sad, I was, nervous for the characters, and also it kind of gets to different topics from finding yourself again and self-discovery and starting all over again through relationship within friends, family, romantic relationship, homosexuality, for example, mental illness. So everything you can be looking for you can find in this book, and it's very nice to read when you have again a cup of tea. Because I always have a cup of tea. 40 years ago, Anthony lost a precious gift that was given to him by his fiancée who died the very same day. Since that moment, he started to collect everything he found, hoping that one day he can return it to the owners and that way make their life a little bit happier. He also started to write many stories about things he found. Meanwhile, we also follow the story of Laura, his assistant, who takes care of him and his house Padua. Laura is currently recovering from divorce and is on the journey of finding herself again and finding the purpose in her life. When Anthony dies, he gives the whole house together with all the things he found to Laura with the wish that one day she can return these things to owners. Laura gets help from Sunshine, very lovely girl with Down syndrome, and Freddy, who works as a gardener. Meanwhile, we also follow another storyline of Eunice and Bomber. He is a publisher and these stories will eventually meet at the end. Honestly, I don't know what else I could say about this book. I just really enjoyed it. I gave it 4.5 stars and yeah, just go and please read this book and let me know what you think down in the comments. And moving on to the very last book in this video and also the last book I read in March is the book called Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey. So in this book, Matthew described previous 50 years of his life, how he was growing up with his parents who were divorced twice and married 3 times to each other, which is something you really don't see every single day, the whole family dynamic, his educational years, 1 year he spent in Australia, and everything from being arrested, getting his Oscar and getting married. So if you really like this actor, I would recommend you to read this book. No, actually I would really recommend you to listen to this book because he is the one who narrates the story in the book. One thing about this book is that I think that if I would be reading the book, I maybe wouldn't enjoy it that much as I did when he was narrating it, because some of the parts just seems a little bit too long or I just wasn't very interested in some parts, so definitely recommend to listen to it as audiobook. One thing I must say though that I did not enjoy about this book is the fact when he was talking about wet dreams he had. I don't mind reading or listening or whatever, watching these sort of things when they come out in the story. However, in this case, I really didn't think it was necessary for the story. It just didn't move it any further. And when he mentioned it for like 3rd time, I was like, right, that's enough. You know, so that's just something to be aware of. It's not a massive thing, massive negative thing or the part of the story, but it's just something that kind of killed the whole vibe of the book for me. So yeah. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope you enjoyed today's video and hopefully you even found some inspiration for the books you could either read next, or if you already read any of these books, please let me know down in the comments because I would really like to know what you thought of them. And I will see you with another video very soon. Bye!